Okay, so I'm doing an AO4 zoom in on chapter 9, and AO4 is looking at connections across literary texts. So that can be, for example, genre. It can be looking at typicality, so whether something in a text is typical of literature as a whole, whether it's typical of a genre, whether it's typical of a time period. Or you can look at things such as intertextuality and various interpretations. So there's quite a lot that you can do in AO4, and it's not particularly heavily weighted, but it's still very important if you want to be getting high marks. Now, because there are a lot of things that can come under AO4, if you know a couple of them, it can get you quite a good way to getting those, I think, 3 marks you get for it on the AQA A-level papers out of 25 usually, but it depends slightly. So first of all, when we're reading The Handmaid's Tale, it's always useful to think of it in the context of a dystopia. And for me, when I'm thinking in the context of a dystopia, the main text that I compare it to in that sense is 1984. I've personally only read a few dystopian texts. So I've read 1984, which is one of the classics. I've also read Margaret Atwood's other dystopian novels, which is the Oryx and Crake series. And then I've read more modern teenage fiction, which is still dystopian, things such as The Hunger Games and the Matched trilogy. So there are all some dystopian novels, but there are other big ones such as Brave New World, and other slightly lighter ones, but they're just some of the ones that I've personally read. And I identify in chapter 9 3 specific things which are typical of the dystopian books which I have read. So sexual relationships, and quite especially forbidden sexual relationships. Now this features prominently in The Handmaid's Tale. So there are 2 forbidden sexual relationships in The Handmaid's Tale. First of all, there's the one that's referred to in chapter 9, which is between Offred and Nick, when Nick is sorry, Offred and Luke. In fact, there are 3 illicit sexual relationships in The Handmaid's Tale. So chapter 9, we're looking at the one between Offred and Luke while Luke is still married. So at this point, they're meeting in hotel rooms. You've also got later on, we'll come to her relationship with Nick and also her relationship with the commander. Where I see that as being typical of other texts, for example, in 1984, the protagonist, his name is Winston, and he has a forbidden sexual relationship with a fellow co-worker called Julia. Oryx and Crake, it's less specific because there are a lot of characters, many of whom engage in questionable sexual practices, and there's quite a theme of prostitution in the Oryx and Crake trilogy. The Hunger Games, again, it's less of a theme, but in Matched, similarly in some ways to Handmaids, in Matched you are quite literally matched to who your partner should be. So any other sexual relations are completely forbidden. Now, probably one of the most important themes which you can get in dystopia is reflection on the past. And this only really occurs out of the the dystopians which I'm talking about today in The Handmaid's Tale and in 1984. It's because in Oryx and Crake, The Hunger Games and Matched, the dystopian world has been continuing for longer than the lives of the protagonists. Even in 1984, Winston barely remembers the time before the Oceanian Society, and actually that makes Offred, the narrator, as we still usually call her at this point in the novel, almost unique, in that she clearly remembers the time before because it is only 3 years, it can be worked out, since Gilead took over. And the focus that she's got specifically in this chapter is reflecting on hotel rooms of the time before. And the focus on such small detail really highlights her nostalgia for the time before and how she wants it back. Other typical themes or things in dystopias are themes of ownership and themes of rebellion. And I think these are probably prominent in almost every dystopian novel or film text which you could read, watch, listen to, whatever. Ownership, it comes into play in chapter 9 in the very first sentence, my room then. So you've got a minor sentence with the whole of my capitalised. And that shows a distinct change from earlier in the novel, not very far back, when the narrator said that she wouldn't call it her room because she didn't feel like she belonged there. And now she's changing it because she's seen the commander enter her room. She's saying, actually, I called it my room by accident. I will now own it. And by capitalising the pronoun, possessive pronoun that is, she's emphasising how she's taking control back. In terms of rebellion, looking at the way she's exploring the room, but more poignantly looking at the phrase "Nelitite bastards carbon runderum." I can't say it properly, but I suspect it's a phrase that you've heard. It's become especially popular with the growth of The Handmaid's Tale, though it has long been a joke. And Margaret Atwood herself notes that she didn't come up with the phrase, it's one that she learned when she was at school. So if you're looking at an interpretation of The Handmaid's Tale, a key one you can look at is the Hulu TV series created by Reese Millis. That came out, season 1 came out in 2017, and season 2 is currently being aired in the USA and comes out in Britain, I think. This is actually in 4 days' time on the 20th of May 2018. So it's been a very popular series, and episode 4 in season 1 is called Nelitite Bastards Carbon Runderum, or however you say it, which I've just abbreviated. And where it's interesting is to look at how the episode, which has this name, differs from the book. And I just like to say that when I'm pointing out differences, I'm not criticising either novel or TV series, I'm just pointing them out for how it's reflected. I have no particular preference for one or the other, and I'm not saying one is better than the other. Okay, so Offred begins the episode in solitary confinement, and this is something which doesn't happen anywhere in the Handmaid's Tale novel. So she's been in solitary confinement. This is her 13th day, and that doesn't happen in the novel, and in fact the novel suggests it would be very unlikely that it could happen because the handmaids are expected to go out for a walk every day in order to keep themselves fit. That would make being in solitary confinement the way Offred is in the TV series impossible. Then you've got her exploring the room and going into the closet. She switches on the light and she finds the message, which is scratched behind the door. And that does happen in the novel, and that is what happens in chapter 9. The context is slightly different because in the novel she's got this plan. She says specifically that what she's done is she separated the room up into sections and then deliberately gone and searched them one at a time, which is where she finds the message. And that happens, as I say, in chapter 9, which is the chapter we're looking at the moment. So, when discovered, because she's lying on the floor in the closet, and the master comes in, because Rita and Cora are kind of combined in the TV series, and it's thought that she has fainted, and she goes to the doctor. So both of these things happen in the novel, but not at this point, and not together. She goes to the doctor in chapter 11, which we'll be looking at later in the video, and she faints in chapter 25. So, as I say, it's just a slightly different interpretation, and it's worth thinking about why Bruce Miller and obviously the other contributors to the series have chosen to combine these events in this way. So you then got flashbacks to her learning about the ceremony, and again, this never specifically happens in the novel. Clearly she does have a lot of flashbacks to the Red Centre, but none of them is specifically learning how to do the ceremony, although it's presumed that she must have been told at some point. And then flashbacks to the attempted escape with Moira. So again, in the novel, Offred doesn't try to escape as well, but the escape of Moira is told in 2 chapters. So the first part is told in chapter 22, and the second part is told in chapter 38. You then got her finding out the meaning from the commander, who also releases her from her solitary confinement. And in the novel, this takes place in chapter 29, although clearly because she doesn't enter into solitary confinement in the novel, he doesn't then release her from it. I think something that is similar in both the television series and the novel is the difference between the meaning of the phrase to Offred and the meaning of the phrase to the commander. The commander, it's a joke, it's something that needs to be played around with in school, whereas for the narrator, it's this message of hope, and that's really clearly signalled in the television series when the episode ends with her saying Naliti te bastards carborundum bitches, and that's a defiance ultimately of Gilead, and that's how it's been used. And I would say that in the novel the narrator tries to use it in a similar way. She knows that this is a message that's been left for her by her predecessor, just interesting to know on the history of the Ntbc Bastardus Carborundum. So, as I say, Olga Ackwood learnt it school as a joke. It's not real Latin. So, Nelite te is roughly translated as do not. Bastards is just a way of making the English word bastard look Latin, while carborundum is a play on the meaning of to grind down. It was used originally, this phrase would have been the first joke, well, not the first joke phrase, but another version of the phrase is illegitimi non carborundum, and that's literally translated as like don't let the illegitimates grind you down, with the illegitimate replacing bastard. But that's again a joke phrase, and the actual Latin phrase could be translated as noli pati a scelestius opprimi. So you can see scelestius is actually the word bastard, so it's quite different to how it appears.